So, good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Ogle, and welcome to this, the third show in the current affairs series that we're running. This is a 16-part series covering everything from the inequality of the world and debt and the financial situation that we're in, right through to ideas on how we can actually start to put that right. We're going to go through the whole thing. We're going to talk about health and wellness. We're going to be talking about education. But tonight, the subject is all about inequality and the 99%. And it's quite opportune when we hear about all the stuff that's in the papers with people fleeing other countries and refugees, that we are talking about this subject tonight. And we've got some fantastic people on the show as well. We've got James Phillips and Sarah from the Zeitgeist movement, and which is commonly known as TZM, and I'm going to let them tell you exactly what that is all about. So welcome to the show, guys.
Hello. Thanks. Yeah, thanks very much for having us on. So I suppose probably telling you what the Zeitgeist movement is about. So the Zeitgeist movement is a non-political sustainability advocacy organisation is the sort of tagline for it. So essentially, the word zeitgeist means the moral or cultural climate of an era, and movement denotes change. So we are basically advocating for a move in the cultural values which basically pervade modern life and really have delivered this socio-economic system that we now find ourselves in. Because we can't divorce the values of humanity from the system that we say has problems in it, and we can't, and vice versa. So the movement sort of takes the problems in the world are systemic. They're not because of some rogue politician or flaw in human nature, or some other sort of contrived abstraction, but rather that the very root premise of how our socio-economic system functions is the problem itself. And we actually put forward a new socio-economic model that seeks to deal with the root problem as we sort of see it, and we can get onto that in more detail, but I think just the fact that we actually promote something like that is reasonably rare, because I think a lot of people talk about the problems and advocate solutions, but they're always within the context of the current socio-economic model which caused the problems in the first place, and that's kind of where the movement differs itself a little in its advocacy. Well, a lot in its advocacy.
Absolutely right. I think the something that I've been saying for a long time is that you cannot make the current system better. You have to create something which is better and replaces what we've got, because the people in it don't really want to change. So there is a real need to kind of take a new way of thinking about these things.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thanks for that, and we'll be back to you shortly. Neil, welcome again to the show. You've been on here, an old trooper. You've been on here for the previous two. Just for the people that might not have seen you before, could you just give us an update on what you're doing with Reason Coffee and Coffee Shop and Bookstore in Watford?
Yeah, hi Chris. So I opened Reason Coffee Shop and Bookstore to highlight issues around sustainability and trying to rebuild communities and show them how they do have strength, do have power, and how they can take action to actually make themselves more resilient in the current climate and enforce change.
Fantastic, and I know you and I work quite closely together on a whole series of subjects. So welcome to the show, and I know you've got some interesting commentary to make on some of these topics that we're going to be covering. So let me just tell you what we will be covering in the next 45 minutes or so. We're going to be talking about the fact that the socio-economic society that we live in isn't working for the majority. I don't know whether you've noticed that, but it's not really. We're going to be talking in a bit more detail about some of the movements that are out there that are really addressing, well, not so much addressing, but are really starting to spread the education, if you like. What we've got going on at the moment isn't going to last for a long time if we carry on going down the same path. We're going to be talking about people like Greece. We're going to be talking about things like Iceland. I mean, Iceland have gone through a bit of a change themselves and coming out the other side of it, and we maybe need to look a little bit at what they did and maybe copy some of the stuff that they were doing. Spain, Portugal, all these areas have got now movements which are saying, you know, come on, folks, we can make some change. We've got the popularity of people like Jeremy Corbyn and a guy running for the States who are perhaps looking at it from a slightly different perspective now, and they're gathering a lot of support, because what they're touting is not the same as what we've had, and it's not more of the same. It's, well, hang on a minute, this sounds more sensible than what we've been having of late. And also, finally, talking about perhaps the change in people across the world in terms of their understanding of what they can achieve, and the consciousness, and perhaps the just people waking up really to the fact that things aren't quite right. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And I'm going to get straight on to James and Sarah and just say, you know, it clearly isn't working for the majority, is it, this?
Well, I think the figures speak for themselves, don't they? 1% of the world now controls 50% of the world's wealth. The richest 1,000 people in this country, the UK, since 2008, increased their wealth from 300 billion to 415 billion.
Well,
so
maybe now it's more.
Maybe now it's even
was
more.
Last year.
The richest 85 people on this planet have more wealth, if you want to call it that, monetary wealth, that is, than the bottom 3.5 billion members of humanity combined. Those figures have been exasperated and increased since 2008 in a period of the worst economic depression since the Great Depression in the 1930s, and perhaps even more global in its reach. So it's almost rather fascinating that people haven't really yet felt the full force of that and started to really make the sorts of changes that perhaps you would expect. There has been some things like the Arab Springs and Occupy and all these sorts of things, but we're going to have to go a lot further, and in both our thinking and our actions. But I think it would have to be, for us, it would have to be, the thinking has to happen first, is that people have got to have an idea of what we need to be heading for, and then we can work back from there. But it's like, at the moment, it feels like even people with an awful lot of good intentions, sometimes they need to be there, but it feels like sometimes we're reaching around in the dark for a light switch, because people say, well, what's your big idea? And everybody says, well, I don't have a big idea, you know, but we've got to do something, haven't we? And it's like, it's great that people are saying that, but someone does need to come through with the big idea bold and just put it out there and say, well, this is what it is, and you know what we should sort of be heading for. But yeah, there's no doubt that financial income inequality is definitely the issue of our era, and I don't think that's any. I think that's a mainstream opinion now, really.
Yeah, it is a mainstream opinion, but what happens is that a lot of people understand, yes, things are harder, but they still don't understand why we are the way we are. They don't know the problems. They don't know how money is created. They don't know how
the technological unemployment.
Exactly, technological unemployment, the state of technology, how things are drastically increasing, and no one in the mainstream media is talking about it. So how can we solve something that people don't even know how to start? So.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. And Neil, last time we were on air, we had Fran on from Positive Money, and basically she was talking about, yes, the stocks and shares have increased, yes, the prices of houses, and people have made on paper a load of money, but we're all in a massive recession.
Yeah, you're very right. The way money is created, people are completely unaware that every time they take a loan out, that is effectively the bank's just creating money out of thin air. And it seems to be we're in a time where scarcity is deliberately created by government, for example, by not building enough houses, so therefore the housing price goes up. That affects a small portion of the population that will vote those people in, those governments in. Everyone else feels helpless and don't know what they can do. But everywhere it seems to me that they make this deliberate scarcity and then just make sure people are hating each other, just so they don't actually look up and try to find out what the system is about. In the shop, I've had experiences of homeless people coming in the shop and actually blaming migrants and refugees for the fact that they're homeless, but when you actually talk to them and say you do realise that that's actually not the case, it was a deliberate effort by many governments, Labour and Tories, not to build enough houses. And once they actually understand that, their eyes are opened up to seeing other possibilities.
Do you think, James and Sarah, that people are not yet experiencing sufficient pain? It's like, it's tough, it's not great, but it ain't that bad yet.
I think that it's difficult to really say, I would, whether that's the case. But there's one thing for sure. If you take a look at the media coverage, since 2008 and of the general election, and the general sort of scapegoats that have been made since 2008 for the hardships of modern times, as you were just rightly saying, Neil, it doesn't fall on the right doorstep, does it? It falls at the immigrants' doorstep and the jobless, feckless layabouts, because it's much better that people fight amongst themselves than they actually point the finger at the correct people who took 23 trillion off us in 2008. I mean, the positive money have got to figure that the quantitative easing bailouts that have essentially kept the economy afloat since then, intermittently, have wasted essentially 375 billion from the public purse. That's the national debt a couple of times over. That's astronomical. And how is that not being printed anywhere in the press? Why is that not the common denominator? I mean, look at the refugee crisis, for example, recently. The Daily Mail and the Sun have done nothing for the last year, ever since any of this was happening, and before then, let's say migrants are a swarm and scum and all these sorts of different titles, and then when the media all portray the picture of a dead child on a beach, washed up on a beach, suddenly the next day they come out and say, oh, do something about this awful humanitarian catastrophe, and go, and all these sorts of things, and people don't see the glaring dichotomy right in front of their face, because essentially that's what they're being fed. The mainstream media, I think, is a very big problem in getting people to understand where, not the blame, I don't like to use that word, but if there is going to needs to be change that starts to happen, they've got their finger pointed on the wrong pulse, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and Chris, and when you were saying about are people not feeling it hard enough yet, there are certainly people who feeling the pain, but there aren't enough of them yet under the current system. You only get real change, I think, when enough people are affected. So when you see your child or your grandchild being affected, I think part of that is the invention of places like Poundland and Audi coming over and driving down the costs. And people think they're a good thing coming into the country, and they are. But what people don't realise is that is part of the drive towards the zero-cost economy. So why are we playing their game? We're heading towards the zero-cost economy. Why don't we make ourselves more resilient and use these cheap zero-cost things to actually change the system?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. And I mean, I think if when the banks crash, when there is a next crisis, because as we discussed in the last show, ultimately you cannot just keep creating debt ad infinitum. At some point, there has to be a reset or something which is so major that you end up bringing in a lot of people into that space who are affected quite seriously by what's going on. And then it's perhaps likely that more people will take this stuff seriously. It's almost like we're just sitting on the precipice here, waiting for something major to happen.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think it'll be in our country. There'll be lots of people shouting for it, but I do believe that there'll be some other more progressive Nordic countries, maybe some India and some African countries, who will take these steps before we do. It will take a few of them to do it to prove that it works, and then once they do, I think the Western nations will be clamouring to have these systems, and they'll be kicking governments out left, right, and centre.
So coming on to some of these movements that are out there, like Occupy and the Zeitgeist movement, I sat down for half an hour, James, and watched your slideshow that you presented. Was it in London that you presented? I think it probably was. I was fascinated, first of all, by all the figures, and also the way the slides sort of built towards the fact that, the story that was unfolding. The Zeitgeist movement is very much an educational movement, which is basically explaining to people that the consumption of resources and the path we're on in terms of climate change and everything else is absolutely non-sustainable. And that message is that message getting out there? Is it getting out there in enough of a big voice to start making that change?
Not yet, I think. You don't hear that in the mainstream media. Nobody knows about economical growth, what actually growth means. Everybody, when was it, last year? There was someone came to the news, the Minister of Finance, saying, "Oh, we've got growth," and everybody was happy. It's like, great, we've got a little bit of more cancer. That's it, fantastic. Everybody was amazed about that. We will have jobs, we will have more money. So I don't think that the common citizen is well informed about that. That's why we've got a project, TZM Education. I don't know if you've heard about it, where we go to schools and talk to kids about it, and we do our lectures and invite friends and people that are interested to understand what that is, because when they heard the first time, like, I never thought things were actually like that. But I think the majority is not aware yet.
But I think they know there's a problem. They're told that there's environmental problems, and I think the environmental problems tend to focus in on global warming, and that's right. That's rightly so. And even though the oil industry tried to deny it for many years, the truth eventually prevails. And I think we're finally waking up to the fact that, unfortunately, probably at the point of non-reversal, that man-made global warming is a reality. But that's not the beginning and end of the story. There's massive levels of environmental destruction right across the board, and we're going through the great mass extinction on this planet as we speak. We'll need 27 Earths to keep on business as usual by 2050. If we carry on as business as usual. I just don't think people know those stats, well enough, and they're not about to hear them anytime from the majority of the press in this country. So I'd certainly agree with Neil once again on that point, that we probably won't be the first ones to see this change. But it's not just the problems that need to be highlighted here, because people know there's something wrong with the environment. They know that it's not, that it's not sustainable, and we can vilify people all we want, but I always say to people, well, people clearly do care, otherwise they wouldn't be leaving their recycling outside their house every week, because they're generally, that's something that wasn't happening when I was a kid. No one left out their bottles and their plastic. It wasn't where the human consciousness was going. But they don't recognise simple things like our economy doesn't make products to be recycled. It makes them to be sold, to keep up cyclical consumption, so that money can carry on being pumped into the system ad infinitum. So, and the infinite growth thing, like Sarah was just saying, has not been fully grasped as a part of social narrative. It's essentially cancerous, and it's actually inverse to what we say we're trying to achieve. So, for instance, just jumping ahead maybe a little bit here, but the education thing that we do is we go in and we say, well, look, in every field of human life, we have better technological solutions at our fingertips. If we're serious about solving environmental problems, and yet we're not using a single one of them. So the adult world is saying that we have these problems. They're saying man-made global warming exists. We need to do something about it. The way we're treating the environment's no good, and everything else. But it doesn't unpack it enough to actually say, and it's our socioeconomic system that's at fault, obviously, because it created these problems. Yet we're trying to solve those problems with the same system that created them in the first place. I mean, Einstein said it once. He said, "You can't solve problems." No, he didn't say that, actually. He's widely misquoted as saying that, but it's a good one anyway. We can't solve the problems of today by using the same method of thinking we used when we created them. And so an education about what technology can actually achieve, if we're serious about the objectives that we want to achieve, is what essentially we try to educate people about. Because even if they are onto something in terms of knowing what the problems are, they do not know what technology can provide. And if they were aware of that, they'd start to say, well, hang on, the free market says that the best ideas should rise to the top, right, because of competition. Well, hang on a second. How can you've just said to me that in every single area of human life we can do things infinitely better, like almost infinitely better than we currently are? How can those solutions exist but not be at the top of the profitable pile through competition? And you go, well, because your socioeconomic system is about monopolies. It's not about the best idea rising to the top. It's about protection. It's about self-maximization.
Absolutely, it's about profit, it's about money, it's about greed, and those people that are in that system want to continue that process. Neil, I know that you've got loads to say about this as well. I mean, you know, loads of people come into your shop and they are quite concerned about the environment, but I can't help thinking that, you know, some of this is only as deep as, well, I put my rubbish in the basket, and I know that trees are being cut down in the rainforest, and I think it's a bad thing, but you know, what's it got to do with me? I think it's almost like the level of absorption of this kind of information just skin deep.
I'm not sure it's skin deep. I think with the big issues, certainly man-made climate change, people are just completely overwhelmed. They're so almost scared that they'd rather use just the old cognitive dissonance. I can ignore that and still carry on my life and watch X Factor. They seem to be down that way. But what I'm trying to do in the shop is show them, so I have some hydroponics outside, and just show them that they can do stuff themselves and make themselves more resilient at home to these systems. I mean, we should, James is absolutely right, we should be using technology for this thing. I mean, they have multi-story buildings with hydroponic farms in the middle of Singapore, growing vegetables in the middle of a city. We could be doing that in this country, but we're not even considering it. It's not even been thought. We are stuck in a system where the people in charge are beholden to big corporations, and the money is that all they want to do is suck the money from the rest of society. It's a self-destructing thing to do, but they're just living in the moment. They live in the 3 monthly and yearly returns to their shareholders, and that's what they're stuck in. They're stuck in that cycle. And you were saying about growth earlier. Growth's a funny one, because what is growth? It's a complete and utter nonsense. If we're having so-called growth financially, but yet more people are homeless, more people have got mental illness, more people are going to food banks, what sort of growth is that? That isn't growth in any way, shape or form that I understand it. And you're also talking about, do people know what's going on? They really don't, to that degree. So there was no press apart from on Facebook about the fact that on August the 8th, we had already used all the resources we could of the Earth for the whole year. So everything from August the 8th onwards we're taking away from future generations, effectively. Now that day came forward by 6 days from the year before. Do the maths. It doesn't take long to realise within a couple of decades we've used all the resources that our grandchildren and that are going to need. So we need a complete new system. And it's one of the things I do try to talk to people about, the fact that we need a complete new system, because at the moment even our tax regimes are there just to support the current system and dragging money away from the 99% to the 1%. So VAT is a great example. It's basically a tax on you spending money, whereas we should have a tax on using resources. If we're going to stick in a financial system until we convert to the utopian future, which will happen, it will happen. I would just like to see it in my lifetime. So why aren't we taxing resources? I mean, why are we shipping clothes halfway around the world and not even paying people at the other end enough to live a decent life? The whole thing to me is just complete nonsense.
And one of the things that came out quite clearly from the video that I watched, James, was that the current economic model is based on profit and making a return, as big a return as possible, on finance invested, and that model has got us into the mess that we're in. And it's all hypothetical anyway. Like Neil just said, we only ever had one planet. It's not grown. What we had at the start, we've still got now. There's no growth because the planet's still the same size. So it's like it's just a man-made fictional thing, this GDP, which is a red herring and always has been. But what I liked about the stuff that you were talking about in that video was that what we're talking about here is a new model where the only things that are focused on are the things which are scientifically proven to save resources, do it for less, are effectively, it's based on science. So if a project is to create energy and the infrastructure to put that energy in place is paid for, then it continues to use renewable energy for a much greater length of time, and it's a fantastic project because it was never based on money. It was about returning value for the human race to make us more sustainable and to keep the planet here so we could carry on living it. And I think that whole concept of moving from a GDP cash finance-based decision-making criteria to one which is based on, is it good for the planet, is it good for the human race, is it good for sustainability in general, is it good for moving us in the direction of the planet being here in 50, 100, 200,000 years, then actually if that passes this criteria, which is not difficult to write down, then it's a good project and we should get on with it.
Right. Yes, I mean, I think you're right in what you say. I think it would probably be a good juncture to sort of point out what exactly that model is. You're right, it is the scientific method for human concern in a nutshell, what the Zeitgeist movement actually advocate. Which sounds nice on the tin, but the thing is when you actually start unzipping it and you start unpacking it and laying it on the table, people will naturally come to it and say, well, that's completely utopian. Because if you think about the decision-making methods that we currently use and how abstract they are, you know, this debt that we apparently all owe each other, this fiat belief that in pieces of paper and currency having, you know, actually some bearing on the physical resources that our planet relies on, political decisions that are based down to the biases of people who, you know, as human beings, we are all fallible to having cognitive biases. These are something that science absolutely just points out, that we have all sorts of negative tendencies in our makeup and how we make our opinions about the world. This is what's wonderful about the scientific method, is that it's the great equalizer over time. It's what has allowed us to come to not just new insights, but actually relinquish dogma and belief. So it's something that it's a decision-making method that works because it's what's allowed us to use this technology to talk to each other and have this conversation right now as we speak. So there's no argument against it. It is definitely the best decision-making method that man has ever used, but we've never used it properly for our socio-economic system. Sure, the communists and the socialists might have claimed that that's what they were doing, but they weren't. It was still an idea based on power and domination and politics and control and police and navies and leaders and armies. And that's not a scientific analysis of the resources that you actually have and how best to use them. in a way that is conducive to human need, and that's essentially what it is that we advocate. But of course, if you actually start to use that prism to look at the world and look at the solutions, then things look so vastly different. Because, for instance, take something like personal ownership, and take cars, let's just say, as a proxy for this example. You take the fact that everybody owns one car. Well, okay, what about driverless cars? And if we lived in cities that were designed to be sustainable from the outset, how many people would need to own a personal car? Well, hardly any, and about 85 or 90% of a car's life is spent inactive. Why do we all need to own a car? It's ridiculous. Now start to think, oh my God, do you mean that we don't need 90%, if we rearrange our living circumstances, that 90% of all of the materials used in the manufacturing of cars is obsolete? Yep, completely. And you go, wow, we could use those resources for so many other things. And when you extrapolate that to everything from planes to trains to food to localization, oh my God, localization, don't even get me started. You start to unzip this and you go, well, no wonder the bloody thing looks utopian. It's because our decision-making method for society and our values as a species are so backwards and so primitive that, well, of course, something that's based on the most up-to-date evidence that we know, extrapolated, would look a little bit odd.
One of the things that, well, I mean, I know Neil's got, I don't know who I was speaking to actually, but they were talking about an initiative where you could basically take something that you own, put it in a shop, and basically somebody else could go in and borrow it. And I mean, the prime example of that, it's even worse than a car, is a drill, right? A drill to drill a hole in a wall, right? How often do we use a drill? Right? And we've all got one. It's just stupid, isn't it? I know, Neil. What was that? What was that thing that you were telling me about it? I think.
Yeah, someone. I can't remember which county it's in. Somewhere down Hampshire, I think. Someone that has opened up a community shop where you can just it's like a lending library for things, just for things. And I thought, what a fantastic idea. We should have one of these in every town and village. It would be fantastic. Can I just go back to a couple of the points you're making there? You're absolutely right about everything you're saying. But the current system we have right now, it's there to maintain and even accelerate the transfer of wealth as we currently know it from the 99% to the 1%. That's the only reason it's there. It's not there to serve normal people. So a couple of bits of proof of this. So per year, over $5 trillion per year is given to the fossil fuel industry through subsidies. In the bailout, it was well over 300 billion we gave out to our banks. And even this year, the EU are just going to do a 1.1 trillion euro quantitative easing to banks. Now, this is all just to prop up money and hand money over to those systems, because that debt will have to be paid back, and it will come from the normal people's pockets. That's the only reason it's there. So I know people say it's utopia and it can't be done, but there you go. There's about $6.5 trillion right there. It wouldn't take long. It wouldn't take long to green the world and bring through the technology if you were putting that much money a year into it, taking it away from the fossil fuel industry and the bankers. It would be a very, very simple thing to do. And people don't realise, people feel powerless. And what we need to say to them, no, you're not powerless. You've got incredible power. You're a consumer. In this current system, you're a consumer. If you was to change to, say, eco-tricity or good energy tomorrow, if half the country did that tomorrow and made the fossil fuel industry bankrupt, the ones left would soon change their mind and they would come on board. They would be fully supported. They would want their money. So it's to say, if you don't like Rupert Murdoch and his newspapers, stop buying his newspapers. Get rid of Sky. One of my friends claims to be a socialist and has Sky, and I'd rib him about it all the time. You can't possibly be a socialist and have Sky. So we have a lot. We have a lot of power. We have a lot of power. I love James talking about the driverless cars, because actually I think it could be the into people's psyches about showing how this utopian future can happen. Because when you start to talk to people about driverless cars a couple of years ago, they were like, oh yeah, but that's 30 or 40 years away, and all of a sudden they're seeing stuff about Google doing it, about Tesla doing it, and they start to realise actually it's quite close. And when you say, well, actually, it's probably only 5 years away, and then anyone who's used Uber, get a taxi, instead of any normal system, oh, how wicked is Uber? It's so much cheaper, it's so convenient. I don't even need to own a car because I just press a button on my phone and a taxi turns up outside the house. And you say, well, can you imagine a whole driverless fleet of Uber cars? There we go, there we have it. We don't need cars. There's no reason for any of us to have cars. So I think the driverless car could be the thing that shows people that technology is the answer.
So yeah, I mean it's an interesting thing, the whole driverless car, and I mean it's going to happen. It has to happen because insurance companies are going to say, well, I'd rather have some automated car because it's going to crash less often. It's not going to drink. It's not going to do this. It's not going to do that. And actually, the insurance premiums will go right down. So you know, a lot of these things will happen in our lifetime. There's no question about it. Moving on slightly, I mean, there's a lot of dissatisfaction out there at the moment. We've seen the rise in, the rise of like rebellion really in Greece, and we've seen a massive, if you like, almost it's the financial coup of Greece by Germany, by basically saying, well, you just take it or leave it kind of thing. We've got the movement now growing in Spain, if you like, the people's movement in Spain. All of southern Europe is kind of waking up to the fact that, well, if they're going to treat Greece like that, what are they going to do to us, kind of thing. And you've got Iceland that 2 or 3 years, how many years ago was it? 2 or 3 years ago only, just said, forget the debts, we'll just write the banks off and we'll start again afresh. There seems to be a movement to saying, actually, we do have power, as Neil was saying. And I remember seeing in your video, James, it's not half the people we need, it's 10%. A 10% shift would bring another 10% following suit. But it's kind of like we're in this transition stage at the moment, are we not, where it's kind of we're betwixt and between. We know there's something wrong, we want to do something about it, but we're not quite ready yet to work out how we can get from where we are to where we need to be and create that massive shift.
Well, I think Neil summed it up quite well when he said, essentially people have still got food in their fridges and things aren't bad enough yet. And maybe it will take, an extra collapse for people to really see it, unfortunately. I think that's when people lose faith in their political leadership, that they turn to other extremes. Now, when I say other extremes, my concern is that you've had the rise of the right in Europe, in recent years as a response to this. You get a rise in, well, we'll do socialism for a while or we'll do capitalism for a while, and these isms aren't, in my view, the answer. The answer is a strategic technological approach, as we've been discussing. I think that Iceland's an interesting case study for sure. I think they've shown the way in at least terms of rebellion against this type of thing. But I suppose with Iceland, I wonder, and I don't know, I'll open up the floor to this, that they've got a smaller population, they've got a different culture of not putting up with these sorts of things, and I think the population size definitely sounds like a reasonable argument for why they were able to do what they were able to do in Iceland. I think we face different challenges in the UK and certainly in Europe, and as soon as you start opening it out into the world, you've got so many damn variables that I don't think anybody really knows how it's going to occur. So I think, yes, they're a good proxy, but just necessarily picking it up and placing it in another country might not be the answer. I think I really have to say I'm really pleased to say that you had Positive Money on your show, because we've done some events with them in the past, and for me at least, I think the first best step that we could take in this country and other countries is what Positive Money are advocating, because we are not going to, even if we deliver all these technological messages to everybody and sustainability and how bad things are and everything else, you're not going to wake up tomorrow and be in a moneyless society that, you know, understands its relationship to the planet, or whatever it might be that your idea of the future is. The future tomorrow will be a monetary system. It will be people going to their jobs. It will be all these sorts of things, and we will have money tomorrow. So we have, even with all of its flaws, which I could go through ad infinitum, we've got to use what we have in front of us for better or for worse, or for what it is. And I think people like Positive Money and Ben Dyson are really the forefront thinkers on this sort of thing. They get good traction in the mainstream press as well. You know, the FT can't poke a hole in it. The Economist is like, yep, this guy knows his shit. They've had their argument heard in Parliament. I think if we could get someone like Jeremy Corbyn, for example, to understand this. Now, he's talking about quantitative easing for the people, and that's fine, but he's not talking about money creation, is he? Now, if he got in a room with Ben Dyson for an hour or two, and those guys had sat down and had a chin wag, I'd be very interested to see what comes out the other side. And that could be something I could get behind, even though it's political in nature, which tends to sort of rub me up the wrong way, because politics as a decision-making method bugs me. But we've got to use it to get to where we're going, even with all our gripes and our grievances about these things. We've got to play with what's actually in front of us. You can't just say, well, it's all wrong and we need to do something different. Well, okay, well, what's the, you know, what? Even if you argue for that and if people accept that's there, well, what's the next step in front of us? And it's very difficult to say, but I think if it doesn't start with money and finance, then what the hell does it start with?
Yeah, I agree completely. It is where we have to start. One of the I'm a Green Party member. I know the Zeitgeist movement isn't a political movement, but one of the reasons I joined the Green Party is because they're an evidential-based party, which means that they do back science. And one of their policies is a basic income, and I agree with you that we need to change the money creation method, and we need to. I personally think we need to install basic income, and once you do that, that can be the start, in my mind, to changing the monetary system as we know it. Going back to countries that are having problems, and it has been a coup of Greece. It's just been terrible what's happened to them. But I think it's almost done deliberately to keep us scared. If you look at our press for the last 30 years, everything in the press is just to keep us scared. I think the message we need to get out to people is don't be scared, because as bad as Greece has had it, we're sold that there's going to be this Mad Max future, which there could be. But when you look at reality of whatever happens in any of these countries that have these massive problems, they get together in communities and they help each other. It's what humans do. We evolve from small communities helping each other. It doesn't take much to switch that back on in the brain, not much at all. So we need to show people that, okay, as bad as it's been in Greece, there's amazing stuff going on. So many little cooperatives popping up, and in fact, the neoliberals have actually not done themselves a favour, because they've actually just introduced a whole raft of the society to say, actually, we don't need you. We can step outside your system. We own our own property. We own our own land. We don't need to be part of your system anymore. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point, and something that's perhaps, well, it will come out in future shows, but what you've said there, Neil, is absolutely right, which is when the going got really tough, and we were talking about, you know, I saw a show where there were like, I don't know, 20 butchers meat traders in a particular town, and that's where it was a bit like Smithfields of old, and there were 0 customers. I'm not talking about a reduction, there were none. Nobody had any money to go in there. And of course, the guys were saying, well, I'm not coming in next week because A, I can't afford to buy any meat, and B, there's nobody to sell it to. So there's no point in being here. And so the whole market collapsed. But then what you get is you get people saying, well, we've got to eat. We've still got houses. We've still got land. And we've still got people. And actually, even with no money, you've still got resources. And those people just start working together. Now, it's almost like it's got to get that bad before humans switch on that switch and say, we're going to have to get together and do something here, because otherwise we're all going to die. and they don't. That's never going to happen because the survival instinct is so strong. But creating that alternative, then, as Neil said, you turn around and go, well, the old guard, this old crowd, to let it get into this state. Well, we don't want you back, do we? Because we're doing all right now. And yeah, is that almost like how it's going to happen?
Well, I think Buckminster Fuller was a great thinker in these type of terms, as well as Jacques Fresco, and I'd recommend people checking out their work. But Bucky Fuller said something good. He said, you never change an existing reality by fighting the existing reality. You change it by making the existing paradigm obsolete. You know, and that by building a new one, basically. It makes the existing one obsolete. So things like, you know, the Uber car that becomes driverless, things like that, pushing these types of avenues and freeing. And the reason I come back to the money is that for now, at least, freeing up the finances in the public purse to actually achieve these things. Because there's plenty of good ideas out here. I've watched, you know, loads of TED Talks with loads of good ideas. We hear great speeches all the time. You go, how are you going to pay for it?
I'll tell you the answer.
The money. They have not got the money because the money's being shuffled off to the 1%. So the point is, money creation at the moment is in private interest. So until you get that resolved, that's why I think that, for me, with all of the groups out there, and they are across the rainbow of all the issues you can get involved in, and all of the sort of groups that are talking about this, for me, numero uno at the top of the pile is positive money and what they're doing, because until you get that horse through the gate, what idea are you going to get off the ground? Are you going to build renewable energy? Where? Who's going to fund it? Not the oil companies, and they're the ones calling the shots. So go on, how are you going to do it? Well, we don't really know. No, it's just so important.
Yeah, it is, and I'm actually currently reading Naomi Klein, This Changes Everything. Funnily enough, it is man-made climate change and fighting the climate change thing that is the catalyst for everything we're talking about, because actually the current system cannot exist if we want to fight climate change. And people have got to realise that very, very quickly, and come 2020, we're not too late, but then the warming up happens much more rapidly. So definitely we need to tackle the money, but there needs to be an issue people can get behind. So I would say, if you care about anything, if you care about quality, if you want positive money, if you want debt, the first place would be to get behind climate change. Because once people learn that they can campaign and they can get involved with one thing, they learn to empower themselves, and they can get involved in many, many things.
So drawing on, we mentioned Jeremy Corbyn a little bit ago. It's a resource in the existing system, and bearing in mind what we've said, is he going to be allowed to make any real change? I mean, ultimately, we know that the politicians are really just puppets to their money masters. It's an existing system, and going back to what you said, James, it's not a replacement. It's trying to operate within. And I know that there are countless stories of people who get into Westminster with great ideas of change, and then they just get bashed around the head until they're so weary that they just end up in a field dead or something.
Well, we wanted to wish that actually Jeremy Corbyn could be effective in the change. However, there's a big machine behind, or in his back, or behind it. I don't know what to say. That even if he gets to power, I don't think he will have loads of resistance, because who owns the media? Who owns the corporations, the companies? It's a big machine, and only one person to do the big change is difficult. I don't know what can happen to actually.
I think he's up against it.
Yeah.
You know, I think is what you're sort of saying. And I mean, if you take the George Carlin sort of line of this, which is you know, that this is all just a freak show, and in America you get the front row seat. I'd certainly like a front row seat where Jeremy Corbyn and Donald Trump get in a room to discuss ideas. That would be a great seat.
Even Russell Brand, in the last video of Truth he did this month, he mentioned that. He says, I really like Jeremy Corbyn coming, you know, about the odds are with him towards being the leadership of the Labour Party. However, if it gets to government, he said exactly the same thing. So we need to carry on fighting in behind and on next to him, because it's not going to be one man that's going to make the difference. The machine is too big.
What do you think, Neil?
I'd agree. I'd agree. The machine to be. Jeremy Corbyn, without a doubt, his heart's in the right place. He's been proven right time and time again on a lot of policies, but he is playing in the current system. And when you look at some of his ideas, like reopening the mines in Wales to put people back to work, at the same time as saying we need to change to a green energy, he's in the old system. But I do think he's open to suggestions. So I've heard him say he's interested in the basic income idea. He said he didn't know very much about it. But I think he is a man, if you put evidence in front of him, if you put scientific evidence in front of him, he will listen. So I think in this country he can be the change, because the youth have engaged with him, which sounds strange for him being a pensioner, basically, almost, but the youth seem to like a different message. Now, he will, without a doubt, be fighting so hard against things. I mean, he's already come out and said he'll break up the media interest, which has to be done alongside the money change. But can you imagine those papers every single day, the stories they're going to be trying to dig up about him every single day? And there's a lot of people don't bother fact-checking those things. So I think we need a massive campaign to say to people, fact-check things. I mean, the other day, what did they accuse Jeremy Corbyn of the other day? Saying it was a tragedy that
Osama bin Laden
had been killed. All the Telegraph, the Mail, the Express, they all run with this. Oh, look, he's a sympathiser to terrorists. It took one Google. It took one Google to dismiss that story and show what a fake story it was. I think that message got out very quickly on Facebook. So I think the people on Facebook very quickly, and Twitter world very quickly, realised that was a fake story. But there's a large proportion of our population right now that don't go and fact check it on the internet. They'll just read that headline and they'll believe it. And that's the 24% of the people who voted for Tories. That's the 14% of people that voted for UKIP, unfortunately. So, yeah, it would be good to get a campaign about let's check some facts from the newspapers, because we need to destroy the newspaper system as it exists. It is part of the cartel. It's part of the problem. It needs destroying.
Just to sort of finish off the show, because fascinating as it is, we've whizzed through an hour almost already. I can't believe it, because this kind of show could go on for a good few hours. But you know, Jeremy Corbyn is one guy. We all know what happened to people like David Kelly. You know, suddenly, you know, a whole revolution can be, or an evolution can be squashed out in a moment. You know, Russell Brand as well. You know, it's a good. You know, he's raising awareness. He's using his, you know, his fame, as it were, to bring a different kind of message to the population and get population excited. But yeah, a lot of some of the things we've been talking about in terms of, you know, we're quite an understanding bunch of people on this show. We read a lot, we see a lot, we interpret a lot. But there are a lot of people out there that are going to be much more superficial. And like you said, Neil, that story that was out there, a lot of people will be retweeting that, resharing it, that Corbyn is some kind of idiot or monster or something. But we need to get a whole groundswell of people that are kind of buying into the fact that we can actually make a difference. So the consciousness and actually the education process needs to continue unabated. And yeah, that for me is kind of like the real key, is that you can tell people what's wrong, you can shout about what's wrong, but people are going to turn around and they're going to go, okay, I get all that, but what's going to replace it then? Tell us what you've got coming up, because Russell Brand hasn't done that. It's just said it's all wrong. Loads of people have told us what's wrong, but how do you change it then?
Yeah, I'm really disappointed in Russell Brand, to tell the truth. I mean, I've actually stopped watching the Truth since the election. But yeah, he comes up with no solutions whatsoever, and there are solutions out there. The solutions are, we have a great method called the scientific method that finds the best answer to everything, every single mystery, every single problem. The scientific method is the way the answer has been found. So he should be pushing that massively. And then if you want to go on the other side, he's not advocating for a basic income. I mean, it's a well-known thing. They've been testing it since the 70s, and every time it's been proven successful, but it's scared the current neoliberal paradigm we're in. It scared them to death because they know it works. He has an open platform. I'm calling on you, Russell Brand. Look up the basic income. Look up what's happened in Canada. Look up what's happened in India. You have the platform. You have the people. You could tell people to be calling to this. You could tell people to be writing to their MPs saying they want it. So, yeah, let's get a message out there. There are solutions. We know what the solutions need to be, and anyone with a following who cares about humanity, or even cares about their own kids, even if they don't care about the rest of humanity, needs to be shouting about these solutions.
Final word, James, Sarah?
I think that's a very good point about Russell Brand. I was most disappointed when he told people to vote for Labour, because as bad as Conservatives might be doing now, and we know what the Conservative agenda regularly is. Inside the current system, would Labour really be doing much better? You know, and I don't buy it. I'm sorry, I don't buy that they'd be doing a hell of a lot better. In fact, in the long term, if Jeremy, let's be a bit optimistic for a second. Jeremy Corbyn gets in, and Labour get behind him. Let's just live in a little bit of fantasy for a minute. I don't know, it might happen. They get behind him, and he gets elected in 2020, and he gets the chance to enact some of the, his ideas. I mean, that would be better than having had 5 years of Ed Miliband, because what was he going to do? It was just going to be Blair #2, wasn't it? Yeah. It wasn't going to do anything. So in retrospect, it's like everybody complains about the Tories getting in, but maybe them giving us 5 years of hell is what everyone needs. You've got to have pain before you've got recovery, and in a sense, maybe that's the way things have got to go for the next 5 years. And if they work out that way, then that might be a positive. But ultimately, I think you're right. The basic income and the change of how fractional reserve banking works could give birth to the rise of things like national basic income, because people go, well, how are we going to afford it? And whenever anybody talks about how are you going to afford the national basic or the universal basic income, no one ever joins that dot between there and fractional reserve banking. And those are the two dots that absolutely have to, if those two dots are joined, then boom, as far as I'm concerned, the whole thing's wide open. You can start to actually afford major changes in societal development quickly. But I would echo, what you're saying about science and reason. I would definitely say to people out there, please go and check out the Venus Project and the Zeitgeist movement, and the Free World Charter and things like that. But definitely, if you want to understand what this new socioeconomic system might look like, then the Zeitgeist movement is a good resource for materials, to check it out. Oh, and one other guy on basic income and technological unemployment is Federico Pastono. Federico Pastono, definitely check out his stuff. It's very, very good.
Fantastic stuff.
One word, Chris. Sorry,
yeah.
One word. I just wanted to echo what James said about the Tory government. I actually said it before the election. I said, don't worry about who wins this one, because if Tories get in, the current system dies quicker. If Labour get in, it's just a long, slow death. So in a way, Tories getting in will actually help to bring around this future we want.
Thanks for that, Neil. I do actually remember writing a blog post and saying, if the Tories do get in, it'll be actually a bit of a blessing in disguise. It's almost like we've had to do the capitalism thing and get through it, because it's only by recognising the gross mistake that it is that we could evolve into something better. And I think on a microcosm, having the Tories for another 5 years is just about saying the same thing. So, but yeah, what's come out of this conversation basically tonight is that none of this it's all very complicated. We've got education needs to take place, we've got people taking more responsibility for themselves, we've got people recognising that they've got power as individuals, we've got people coming together to recognise that if they work together they can solve a lot more. We've got the fact that we need to perhaps bring about a new way of working which makes the existing systems obsolete. And there are other shows coming up which have got education on them. So James and Sarah, if you fancy coming back for that show and telling us about what you're doing in education, because it's the next generation that are going to carry the baton on for us, then that would be fantastic. So thanks for coming on the show. Any last words?
Thank you very much for having us. It's been a really enjoyable conversation. I'm very pleased that after the many hours slogging away for the slave wage that I came home to this.
Thanks very much. And Neil, anything?
Good to speak to you, James and Sarah. No, it's fantastic. And I can tell you now, from having a shop on the high street, there are people searching out there. There are people looking for the answers. So we just now need to make them aware of the other people who are also fighting as well. Thanks, and thanks for having us on again.
Brilliant.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, that's it, folks. We're back again next week. I will add to the end of this thread what we're going to be talking about next week. Thanks to all my guests that have been on this week, and hope you've enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing you all again this time next week. So cheerio for now.